Are the whip satisfied? No? Are the whip satisfied? The motion is for second reading of Bill number 2. Recorded vote has been called. The clerk will call the roll. Those in favor will say yes. Those opposed will say nay.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Morse.
Yes.
Mr. Rodney McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Russell.
Yes.
Mr. Ham.
Absent.
Mr. Baker.
Absent.
Mr. Muir.
Yes.
Mr. Christie.
Yes.
Mr. Fage.
Yes.
Mr. McIsaac.
Yes.
Ms. Bolivar Getson.
Yes.
Mr. D'Entremont.
Yes.
Mr. Hurlbert.
Yes.
Mr. Barnett.
Yes.
Mr. Morash.
Yes.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes.
Mr. DeWolf.
Yes.
Mr. Dukes.
Yes.
Mr. Chisholm.
Yes.
Mr. Langell.
Yes.
Mr. Hines.
Yes.
Mr. O'Donnell.
Absent.
Mr. Chataway.
Yes.
Mr. Parent.
Absent.
Ms. Massey.
Yes.
Mr. McDonnell.
Yes.
Mr. Corbett.
Yes.
Ms. Maureen McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Dexter.
Yes.
Mr. DeVoe.
Yes.
Mr. Manny McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Graham. Absent. Mr. McKinnon.
Yes.
Ms. Whalen.
Yes.
Mr. Gaudette.
We.
Mr. Glavine.
Yes.
Mr. Caldwell.
Yes.
Mr. H. Dave Wilson.
Yes.
Michelle Sampson.
We.
Mr. Stale.
Yes.
Ms. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Parker.
Yes.
Ms. Raymond.
Yes.
Mr. Epstein. Mr. Pye. Mr. Goss.
Yes.
Mr. David Allen Wilson.
Yes.
Mr. Estabrooks.
Aye.
Mr. Sampson.
Yes.
Mr. Theriault.
Yes.
Mr. McNeil.
Yes.
The results, Mr. Speaker, all present voting in the affirmative.
Motion is carried.
An act to amend Chapter 402 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Retail Business Uniform Closing Day Act, and Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Labor Standards Code.
Order of Bill number 2 be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. Honorable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 7, the labor Bill number 7. Bill number 7, the Labor Standards Code and Vital Statistics Act, Mr. Speaker. The Honorable
Bill number 7. The Honorable Minister of Environment and Labor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise today to speak on Bill 7, the Compassionate Care Leave Act. As Canadians, we're blessed to live in a country where health care is a top priority. We know that health care is the main concern of most Nova Scotians. Here in Nova Scotia, our government has made a commitment to take the necessary steps to make the essential investments to provide better health care for you and your family. Unfortunately, many families know firsthand the challenges that come with caring for a loved one who is gravely ill. To Today, I'm pleased to introduce changes to the province's labor standards code that will ensure informal caregivers have the support they need to care for their family members in their time of need. This bill will allow an employee to take an unpaid leave of absence for up to 8 weeks to provide palliative care to a parent, child, or spouse. This benefit will allow an informal caregiver to spend time away from work to care for a gravely ill loved one without fear of losing his or her job. This bill complements the federal government's commitment to provide a 6-week compassionate care benefit through the Employment Insurance Program, which will come into effect on January 1st, 2004. Through this bill, families can assess support from their government when it is most needed. We all share a common commitment to make Nova Scotia a better place to live, work, and raise a family. This bill effects an important benefit and protection for our family. It allows Nova Scotians to care for family members in their time of need. It will help lessen their distress and anxiety. It's a compassionate and caring initiative, Mr. Speaker. This legislation is all-encompassing. All employees who have been employed for at least 3 months will be eligible for an 8-week unpaid leave. This legislation is strong. Employees' jobs will be protected while on the leave. This legislation is direct. Applications for the provincial benefit is easy. Employees will only have to obtain a certificate from a doctor and make the necessary arrangements with their employer. This legislation is fair. The leave can be taken for any immediate family member, including a spouse, child, or parent, or for a common law or domestic partner and their child or parent. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to move second reading of Bill 7 today. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I wish to thank the minister for bringing this legislation forward. I think it's legislation that really, mirrors what our federal brothers are doing, in particular in the federal arena, the work that the MP Peter Stauffer has done to bring this legislation forward, and indeed, what he had looked for originally was that it would cover the whole scope of a year's EI, 52 weeks. But Mr. Stauffer fought the good fight, and we appreciate for him putting this on the public agenda. And we thank the government for bringing it forward. I'm not here today to debate at any great length the idea it should be more weeks. I wish it was, but I think it is the reality that we're moving forward. That a society, they say, Mr. Speaker, is judged how we treat our people with the greatest deal of misfortune, and I think this clearly is one. What more measure of a society can we be seen as allowing family members to care for their loved ones in their last days? And some could actually say that this is the least we could do. And, in the reality of our economy and how it's structured today, that this is a move forward in being compassionate province that recognizes the value that families place on being with their loved ones in this very dire time, Mr. Speaker. I want to, again, before I take my place, thank the government for bringing this forward, realizing that, in a more perfect place, I would think I would want more, but I'm clearly satisfied with what's happening here today, and I hope that for the good of us all, that this is not used very much, Mr. Speaker, that we get on that road to wellness, that we eradicate a lot of this diseases that would cause this leave to take effect. So, Mr. Speaker, I thank the government, and I will take my place. Thank you.
Honourable member Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I too want to add my voice in approval of this particular bill, and certainly our caucus will be supporting this bill. And I congratulate the minister for bringing it forward. The bill proposes changes to the Labour Standards Code and the Vital Statistics Act, and is referred to as a Compassionate Care Leave Bill. And while this is a good bill, there is some parts of this bill that I guess we should be saying a few words about. And what the bill does really is make some pretty significant amendments. Even though this bill mirrors federal legislation here, it certainly brings it home once again to the need for compassion in dealing with one's relatives, particularly in the area of palliative care. And this bill will do that. But I hope, Mr. Speaker, that this bill is used ultimately to complement caregivers who are now in the field, professional caregivers, and not to substitute from those caregivers. In other words, I would hope that the two would coexist together, and that we still move as a government and as legislators in this province to try and improve the level of care we give to relatives and people that are confined to their homes with serious illness, particularly those who are suffering terminal illnesses and are in need of palliative care. In the best of intentions of relatives to care for people, sometimes a little bit more is required in that. Sometimes we do need the professional services of home caregivers. And I would hope that the government, that this legislation in no way restricts the ability for palliative care patients to be able to access that kind of professional service as well. I will take the government on face value here today that this will not happen, that this system will work, and that one will complement the other, and that people who are experiencing problems with their health, terminal problems, and are in need of palliative care, not only from caregivers but from relatives, will be able to get that care in their own homes in their last days. I believe the bill is a good bill. I believe it deserves swift passage through the House, and I anticipate that that will be the case, Mr. Speaker, and our caucus will be supporting the bill. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, on introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in the Speaker's Gallery is a resident of Sackville who has served government well over the last number of years, and it's Sarah Reeves. I'd like to introduce her to all members of this House. Sarah will be heading for British Columbia and taking up residency there as she pursues a new opportunity in her life, and I'd like members to welcome Sarah and congratulate her on her new endeavors.
Certainly welcome Sarah. Good wishes in her travels west, and hope she comes back to see us. Good luck, Sarah. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to take this opportunity to say a few words on Bill number 7. It is an important step for caregivers to be able to have some time off from their employment to care for loved ones who are extremely ill. Speaker, I've certainly had the opportunity, as I'm sure probably other members have, to have presentations made from caregiver support groups, which are more and more propping up throughout the entire province. And I know that Richmond County has a very strong support group for caregivers. In fact, it's a group that meets, I believe, once or twice a month, and it brings together caregivers. It provides them with some information, provides them with support, which is one of the most important elements for caregivers to have. Mr. Speaker, while this is an important first step, one of the initiatives which was brought to my attention, which I found extremely interesting, and which I would be curious as to whether the House might look at adopting this type of initiative. It would have to come from the federal government, but certainly one would hope that this House would be willing to at least explore it. As many members know, the federal government has made a move in the last number of years under the Canada Pension Plan, what's called the Child Rearing Dropout Provision. What that does is it provides credit to mothers who have left employment to stay at home, to have children, or to raise children, and it provides them with a credit in their Canada Pension rating for that time that they were not in the workforce because of the fact that they were helping to raise their children. And it's provided them with a credit. Now, mind you, it's not a very big credit that's being provided, but at least it's a step towards recognizing that mothers have had to give up their ability to contribute to the Canada Pension Plan because of the fact that they have been at home providing for children. One of the interesting initiatives that was brought to me by a caregiver organization was, what if we were to call upon the federal government to put in place a similar program such as the Child Rearing Dropout Provision for caregivers who leave their employment in order to provide care for a loved one, for an aging parent, for a child, whatever the case might be. I've had a number of caregivers who've come to me and said, look, I worked all my life. When I reached 40, 45, I had to leave work to come home to take care of mom and dad. So while they were happy to be able to come home and do that, the time that they left the workforce, they were no longer contributing to Canada Pension Plan. And when they went to collect their pension, when they went to apply for their pension, they then found out that all of those years that they didn't contribute were factored into the equation of what they should be getting for Canada Pension. So here's an opportunity, I believe, Mr. Speaker, where this House might want to look at that, and even whether it be through resolution or not, but to call upon the federal government to possibly look at extending that provision of the Canada Pension Plan to be there to provide support for caregivers who leave their employment in order to provide care for a loved one. Because it is having a drastic effect, because I know certainly of a number of caregivers who are now at the age where they are ready to retire, who are now seeing the effects of having left the workforce, not only the loss of income, but more importantly, the loss of contributions to the Canada Pension Plan, which is a very significant part of their income once they retire. So I thought it was a great idea when it was brought to me, Mr. Speaker. I do hope that there will be further opportunity to speak about it further here in the House, and I think it's something that I'd be surprised if any members of this House would object to, but certainly something I believe that this House can take one step further along the way of what's being proposed in this bill, and to call on the federal government to explore the possibility of providing that same type of provision for caregivers under the Canada Pension Plan. But this is a good bill based on the decisions made by the federal government, and certainly I just wanted to rise and bring forward that idea for hopefully further discussion at another day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour to be to close debate on Bill number 7. The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly appreciate the comments from the members opposite. We certainly will listen to any suggestions and look at them, and we expect a speedy movement of this bill. So I would be very pleased to close debate on Bill 7 and move for second reading. Thank you.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 7. Is the host ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 7, entitled An Act to amend Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Labor Standards Code, and Chapter 494 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Vital Statistics Act.
This bill will be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 8?
Bill number 8, the Volunteer Protection Act. The Honourable
Speaker,
Deputy Premier.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Minister of Justice, I'd like to move second reading of Bill number 8, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Bill number 8 refers to protection for volunteers, and it expands the protection afforded volunteers by assuming the costs, a full recovery of costs for actions brought against a volunteer outside of the present parameters within the Volunteer Protection Act. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a very simple bill, and Mr. Speaker, I now move second reading of Bill number 8.
The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Justice Critic for the official opposition, I wanted a minute to speak on it. This amendment itself is housekeeping, quite frankly. It just allows for solicitor-client costs for a volunteer who is sued and the matter is not one in which they have a claim against them. Mr. Speaker, though, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to talk about the Volunteer Protection Act, though. This is an act that we passed in this House before the last election. In the last Assembly, the 58th Assembly, would have been, I think, 2 years ago now that we passed this bill. And I presume it's been proclaimed since then, but I must say there was a major delay. I had a lot of calls in my office from people, from organizations who were saying we thought this bill had been passed and it still had not been proclaimed. And it caused a lot of dismay amongst Nova Scotians who were saying, why was this delayed? This was supposed, and is an important piece of legislation to encourage volunteers to get involved, to stay involved, without fear that there's going to be either frivolous or even more serious lawsuits against them, and them having to be held liable jointly or by themselves. And Mr. Speaker, it's important that this legislation not only, if it is proclaimed, and I'm presuming it is at this point, it's also important that some education be out there. I was speaking with a constituent of mine yesterday who is involved in the scouting movement, and her position was she didn't even understand what the bill was about. She thought the bill was about they couldn't be sued, or the fact that they couldn't sue us. and all this sort of stuff. So a little education in this bill would go a long way to ensuring volunteer organizations had a much bigger appreciation of what exactly is in the legislation, what their rights are now that the bill is passed, what their responsibilities are now that the bill is passed, and as a means, even a little brochure that would allow organizations to be able to distribute it to their volunteers so they understood what their obligations were or were not after this legislation is proclaimed, if it has been proclaimed, Mr. Speaker. And I would be remiss if I didn't encourage the government to do that while this bill was before the House. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Justice Critic for the Liberal Party, I'm pleased to speak, say a few words on the Volunteer Protection Act. And as has been said by my colleague from the NDP, it does speak about providing a volunteer who has been taken to court on a matter which is termed to be frivolous or vexatious, that they can recoup their costs for defending themselves in that manner. But, Speaker, I have to tell you, there is still a great deal of confusion which exists around the Volunteer Protection Act. And I had to tell you, this government has not been very good in clearing up that confusion, because just like the Mayor from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage, I've received a number of phone calls from volunteer boards, especially boards, for example, community economic development boards, where the board of directors would be involved in the signing of contracts, in the purchase and sale of assets, and that there's a financial aspect to it. That's where you usually get your biggest concern from the volunteer groups. I started getting the calls after the bill was passed saying, well, we have liability insurance right now. With this bill, can we cancel our liability insurance policy? I said, well, that's a good question. I'm going to try to find out. So I called the Department of Justice. I speak with legal counsel there, and I asked, look, as a result of this bill passing, does that mean that groups who have liability insurance coverage should now cancel their policy because they're now protected under the law with this act? Oh, no. Don't tell them to cancel their insurance policy. This does not replace insurance policies on liability, which begged me to ask, well, what does it do? Because if this doesn't provide the adequate protection which the government is telling us it does, why are we still telling these groups that they need liability insurance, which I'm sure you'll know yourself, Mr. Speaker, is becoming extremely expensive in the province of Nova Scotia. It's not just auto insurance anymore. Liability insurance is one of the sectors of insurance which has also seen a very dramatic rise, in some cases even more dramatic than with auto insurance. So we need to be able to make sure that, I know the Mayor from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage has said there needs to be better education on that, and I fully agree. But I think the government itself needs to be sure on its own when these groups start calling as to what information they are to be given, because there appears to be conflicting information that is being sent about this bill, about what actual protection it does provide and how strong it is. And the last thing we want to see, Mr. Speaker, is any volunteer that has gotten on board with the belief that they are protected under this legislation would somehow find themselves before the courts. And Mr. Speaker, while it's fine to say that with this particular amendment to the bill here, that is now going to allow a volunteer to recoup from any sort of, from any expenses from defending themselves if it's found to be a frivolous or vexatious lawsuit. Mr. Speaker, often some of the individuals who want to take volunteers to court may not have the financial means or the assets to allow a volunteer to recoup their costs. So there is still a great deal of concern that is going to remain out there, even with the passage of this bill, until we're able to clearly tell volunteers what their liabilities are and what their protections are. And there needs to be a better education campaign. I have no doubt the minute that the media is going to pick up on the fact that there's an amendment to the Act passed, I will get the same phone calls. I'm sure the member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage will probably get the same phone calls to say, well, what is the status of this Act now? What actual protection does it provide? I would hope that the Department of Justice would have the information readily available to members of this House and to volunteers throughout this province who may contact them looking for better direction on this and looking for information where they can be assured that they are going to get accurate information on the specific intent of this bill. Mr. Speaker, I do look forward to this bill going to law amendments to see if there is any organizations out there that may raise some concerns with this or may suggest any sort of amendments to this piece of legislation to make sure that we can continue to encourage as many Nova Scotians as possible to go work as volunteers and to help improve our communities throughout this entire province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Recognize the Honourable Deputy Premiers to close debate on Bill number 8.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, the comments of both the member for Cold Harbor Eastern Passage and the member from Richmond are interesting, and I wish I could provide you with answers to your questions, which I think are quite pertinent. I know that, for instance, the member from Cold Harbor Eastern Passage mentioned the lack of knowledge of some volunteer organizations of the Volunteer Protection Act, and I think his point is well made that perhaps we should have a brochure that describes the bill and the entitlements under the bill, and that should be circulated to volunteer organizations. And with regard to the member from Richmond, I'm not sure exactly why you're unable to obtain a satisfactory answer from the Department of Justice, to be quite honest. It would seem to me that if people already have insurance, that they should indeed retain their insurance, but I would think they should be able to, or entitled to, get the answer as to why they should not, in view of this, actually get rid of their insurance, unless it is to accommodate the case that he brought forward later on, where he said the person who is taking the action is unable to pay for the costs of the volunteer. So, Mr. Speaker, I will pass those remarks on to the Department of Justice and my colleague, the Minister of Justice, and Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that he will have the answers when this bill gets to law amendments. So those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I move second reading.
Motion is for second reading, Bill number 8. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 8, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 14 of the Acts of 2002, the Volunteer Protection Act.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Member for Cold Harbor Eastern Passage on introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to just take a minute to recognize in the West Gallery Jim Morton, who was the NDP candidate in Kings North in this last election and did, I would argue, a very good job representing our party in that particular race. And hopefully the House can give him a warm applause and welcome him to the House.
Certainly welcome our guest to the gallery today and hope he enjoys the proceedings. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 10, the Municipal Elections Act.
Bill number 10, the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to open debate and speak briefly to Bill number 10, an act to amend the Municipal Elections Act. Much of this bill is housekeeping. However, there is at least one major change. This legislation will remove the authority for municipalities to post copies of the voters list in public places. As many members are aware, posting copies of the voters list in various public places was a long-standing practice. The purpose was to enable voters to check to see if they were on the list and indeed on it. If they weren't on the list, they could contact the appropriate officials and get their names on the list. Typically, these lists were posted in stores, post office, other public buildings and facilities, and even stapled to telephone poles. There have been privacy concerns about this practice, and for this reason, it has been discontinued with federal and provincial voters lists. With the support of the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities, and following recommendation of the Committee of Municipal Returning Officers, it has been decided that posting should be removed in the municipal election process as well. With passage of this bill, voters who want to check if they are on the list need only to call municipal revising officers. Municipalities can place ads advising of the details in local papers with dates, times, and phone numbers. Municipalities also provide this information to voters by mail or radio or television advertisements. That represents the substance of this bill. I look forward to comments of other members on this bill, and I'm pleased to move second reading of Bill number 10. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, I would commend the government on the introduction of this bill, and I'm delighted to find that some time-honored practices, which may even predate the existence of the telephone, are finally going to be updated. As the Minister has said, there are privacy concerns with the public posting of names and addresses of electors, and we have many, many other ways of disseminating information and for voters to find out where they are on that list, and I would hope that this will move promptly. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak on the bill. One concern that I have is the asking of birth dates, and privacy being an issue, as the honourable member previous had mentioned. I don't know why a birthday would be required unless it would be for just to see if a person is of age to vote. But after that, I believe that's going to strike a poor note with voters listing their birth date, especially the female gender. A lot of times take objection to that. Mr. Speaker, in the past election that we've just experienced, there were numerous voters left off the list, and I hope that remedies are being taken to eliminate that. One thing that I don't agree with really is in there we're saying that candidates for the election don't have to have their taxes paid. And with that, I don't agree with that simply because if a person doesn't have their taxes paid to their municipality and they do become a successful candidate, they're going to be involved in creating policy for the collection of taxes. And here they are creating policy for the collection of taxes and around the municipality, and at the same time not having paid their own. So I think it sets a poor example as a candidate for election, not to have their own bills paid and then to put into practice somewhere where other people's, the residents would have to pay theirs. The privacy issue, of course, we have victims of abuse and things like that, and so maybe the non-posting of the list would give those people additional protection from partners or spousal abuse. I even know of some cases where workers, government workers, probably social service workers, community service workers, and maybe people in Revenue Canada would like to keep their place of residence, have some anonymity to that. Because of the jobs that they're involved in, they don't care to have people know where their place of residence. So we need a good balance. One thing I might suggest that when the honourable member previous mentioned about some of the things that predate a long time being removed from the bill, which are good, maybe somebody may take a little look at some futuristic way of voting. We all have social insurance numbers, and we're aware that even today those are being compromised and being copied. But if there was another way of voting, electronically voting, that maybe people wouldn't have to go see if they're on a list, record their social insurance number when they voted or something like that, and then it's recorded once and never again to be done. So one other cautionary note, in there is stated the collection of particulars. But particulars is, what's the definition of particulars? What is it? What are the particulars that we want to collect? So I caution the government on that to be aware of that, and maybe they can come up with a definition of what particulars, because it could be short and sweet, or it could be a long expanded version which would garner more personal information than the person would require to give. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to say that I will support the bill to have it go off to law amendments, and we'll examine it further there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, and to close debate on Bill number 10, the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the members opposite for their comments as well. I just want to clarify that the collection of birth dates are only used to verify that the person calling in the preliminary list is the person that's calling. Such is the practice that's used right now with the provincial and federal government. The final list of voters will not include any birth date information, and it's just a precautionary measure so that we know that when people call to see if their name is actually added to the list or not added to the list, we're able to identify that that person may in fact be that person by requiring them to provide their birth date information. So with those words, Mr. Speaker, I move the second reading.
Motion is for second reading, Bill number 10. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 10, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 300 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Municipal Elections Act.
Or the bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 11, the Collection Agencies Act.
Bill number 11, the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise and open debate on Bill number 11, the Collection Agency Act. The Collection Agency Act sets the ground rules for what collectors can do to recover debts and what they cannot do. Consumers Credit Conduct Act is similar in nature but applies to firms that do their own collections. Bill 11 reinforces the principles that debtors must be treated fairly and with respect. The proposed changes in Bill 11 will do three things. 1. Add uniform language to our Collection Agencies Act as agreed to by Canada's ministers responsible for consumer affairs. 2. Make similar changes to our Commercial Creditors Conduct Act. And 3. To amend our laws to make them easier to apply and to enforce. Mr. Speaker, every province and territory in Canada has laws like ours that prohibit certain collection practices. Over the next year or so, every province and territory will introduce similar changes so that prohibited practices are basically the same across Canada. Nova Scotians' protection for debtors is already at a high level, so the changes to our legislation are not as extensive. The key changes outline restrictions on the following: phone calls or visit to a debtor, contacting relatives, friends, or neighbors of a debtor, contacting a debtor's employer, and the information they can ask an employer, the time of day and the days a collector may contact a debtor, publishing or threaten to publish a debtor's failure to pay an amount owed. Mr. Speaker, we are also proposing better protection and accountability for debtors through the establishment of trust accounts and requiring financial statements at a debtor's request. This legislation also includes a number of administrative changes, mainly to renewal of licensing and expanding the penalty options available to the registrar. Mr. Speaker, in summary, these amendments are intended to both benefit debtor and collectors. These practices will eventually be law in all provinces. Debtors will have greater control over where, when, and how they are contacted. They will have better accountability of the money they have paid. Collectors will have a clear understanding of what they can and cannot do. And civil servants responsible for enforcing the Act will have better tools to work with. I look forward to the comments of other members on Bill number 11, and I move second reading.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for bringing this bill forwards. It's particularly important because we do live in an increasingly credit-based society, and debt is an important fact of life for many, even most of us perhaps, I dare say. In any case, the treatment of debtors by collection agencies can stand to jeopardize an occasionally tenuous social standing, so I would commend the prohibitions introduced on contacting a debtor's employer, family, friends, neighbors, etc. And I'm delighted that we're getting to this point already. Particularly the introduction of trust accounts as well. As the student loan situation, I think, is one case in which there are large amounts of money being held over a period of time, and it's certainly a very reasonable thing to establish trust accounts, and I'm glad that debtors will be able to ask for a written accounting of the status of their account. There are, I suppose my only question would be whether the legislation does go far enough to protect the rights of debtors from harassment. That's frequently the case with lower income people, so it may be important to get information out to debtors of their rights under this revised act. And I do have a question about the practice of online dunning. I know that there is in fact there is the registry of collection agencies practicing in Nova Scotia, but I understand that there are also sometimes collection agencies who are actually doing this electronically as well. So we'd want to be sure to catch those. But there are, as I say, a number of practices surrounding debt and perhaps the invitation to debt, which we might want to investigate further, but not in this context, and I hope that we can move this on to law amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I too rise to speak to the bill. Mr. Speaker, in the bill, I phrase my comments by saying that accountability and due diligence are required on both sides. There's maybe a percentage, a very small percentage, but there's a percentage of the population, people who knowingly overcharge, knowing that they have no intention of paying, and there's others who make a living off of other people by overcharging and knowing that the collector won't be able to collect. But at the same time, we don't want to put undue pressure on people who fall into debt, whether intentionally, unintentionally, or accidentally. Sooner or later, we all experience some sort of pressure along those lines and fall into debt, and we want to be respected and given an opportunity to pay our bills. But at the same time, we don't want to unnecessarily tie the hands of collectors. So we've got two parties here, one trying to collect the debt and one trying to pay the debt. And the balance to strike is that there can be a compromise between both to make it fair on both sides, that the person doing the collecting can do their job, but that the debtor has every opportunity to pay the bill within a reasonable amount of time according to their means. And Mr. Speaker, I would close then by reading from the Act, which says that amendments should help ensure debtors are treated fairly, and collection agencies would benefit from having a common set of rules from one end of the country to the other. And I'm quoting Mr. Burnett when I do that. So therefore, I will be voting to move the bill through to second reading and finish by saying accountability and due diligence on both parties would be required. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognized Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Operations, closed debate on Bill number 11. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise and close debate on Bill number 11. This bill brings together best practices from across the country. It's our attempt to provide a balance of the competing interest and to do what the Speaker spoke about, and that is the due diligence and provide that balance between debtors and creditors. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would move debate close. And
motion is for second reading of Bill number 11. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 11, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 77 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Collection Agencies Act, and Chapter 91 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Consumer Creditors Conduct Act.
Bill 11 be sent to the Law Amendments Committee. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 15, an act respecting court jurisdiction and the transfer of court proceedings?
Bill number 15. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move second reading on Bill number 15 on behalf of the Minister of Justice. I must confess, Mr. Speaker, this bill is way beyond my level of expertise in the law. But however, as I understand it, it is a bill that does, as the title suggests, permit court proceedings to be transferred from one province to another. And also, I'm told that we would be the first province to actually enact this legislation, which is part of the Uniform Law Conference. We would not proclaim this act, Mr. Speaker, until other jurisdictions come on stream. Mr. Speaker, if it's the pleasure of the House that we stand this until the Minister of Justice is back for second reading, I'd be willing to do that. However, at the present time, I'll just take my seat and let the leader of the members from Cole Harbour Eastern.
There's lots of help on the opposite side of the House with this bill today. Some expertise. The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was thinking earlier around the Department of Justice on an earlier bill, Bill number 8, I think, in this one. It must be one of the only ministries the Government House Leader hasn't been the minister for in his years in government. And yeah. It's never too late. That's right, Mr. Speaker. I'm only going to speak for a couple of minutes on this. As the Government House Leader noted, this is part of the Uniform Justice Reform project that's going on. And what happens is the Ministers of Justice in Canada, provincially anyway, I don't know if the federal one would be involved as well, get together and harmonize so that there is some consistency in the rules of procedure or in the how things work in the courts and jurisdictional issues. Obviously, this is to make it easier not only for businesses but people involved in the legal profession and those who are accessing courts to know that there is some consistency across the country. The more we can do this on a regular basis, the better. This is fairly non-controversial. In fact, I would argue it is non-controversial. Most of it is housekeeping and issues resulting in trying to have some form of uniform, harmonized procedure as to what the rules are. And we've passed a few of these in the past few years, and we're glad to see this go to law amendments and hear what others may say, and we have no problem supporting it at second reading. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Speaker. It's a pleasure to say a few brief comments on Bill number 15, the Court Jurisdiction Proceedings Transfer Act. Speaker, has been pointed out, this was a recommendation under the Uniform Law Commission that suggested that we work towards, all Canadian provinces work towards better uniformity in all the laws to try to make it easier for companies and for individuals throughout the country who are involved in different proceedings that might involve different Canadian jurisdictions, to make it as transparent and as an easiest process as possible. Because, Speaker, many lawyers will tell you if you have to transfer a proceeding from here in Nova Scotia to Ontario, it can be an absolute nightmare. Not only a nightmare in the legal sense and in the time sense, most unfortunately for the client, it's a nightmare in the financial sense, because it can be extremely expensive, a lot of red tape, and can take a significant amount of time to take place. So anything that we can do to try to make it work easier for individuals and for business in this province is a good thing, especially when you look, Mr. Speaker, at the fact, for example, you look at our offshore here. Many of the companies that are based here in Nova Scotia and that are doing work on the offshore have different head offices throughout the entire country, some of them even internationally. And as a result of that, it's quite often that any dispute over contracts, over payments, can involve having proceedings being moved from through several jurisdictions from where they may have originated. So I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I've witnessed myself not too long ago trying to have a judgment made in the Small Claims Court here in Nova Scotia, having that judgment put in force in Ontario, and needless to say, that has been a nightmare in itself of trying to have that take place, and it is still ongoing at this time. So. The unfortunate part, there is a good part here and an unfortunate part. We are the first province to actually put this in place, which is a good thing. The unfortunate thing is there are all the other Canadian provinces haven't done it yet. So in order for this to work, it's going to be imperative that all of the other provinces follow suit and enact this type of legislation as quickly as possible. So unlike Sunday shopping, this is actually one bill where the government can say we're the first to do it. Whereas on Sunday shopping, they're the last to do it. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I do look forward to this bill moving forward, and anything that we can do as legislators to make the legal system a more efficient and more effective system, that's always a good thing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Deputy Premiers to close debate on Bill number 15.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the legal advice from the two critics to the Department of Justice, and Mr. Speaker, I will move second reading of Bill number 15.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 15. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 15, entitled An Act Respecting Court Jurisdiction and the Transfer of Court Proceedings.
Or this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call the Order of Business Government motions?
Government motions.
Mr. Speaker, I'd move that the adjourned debate on the address and reply to the speech and throne be now resumed.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure for me to rise here this afternoon and to continue this debate on the throne speech reply. Well, up on my feet, I guess, well, I've had the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, a couple times to get up and talk over the last number of days on other issues, including Bill number 2 on the Sunday shopping issue, and certainly the emergency debate last week on the crisis facing our farmers and the beef industry. In spite of those, I guess, Mr. Speaker, this is certainly my first real opportunity to get up and as a member of this legislature here from Pictou West, and to reply here in this first session of the 59th General Assembly. And I just want to say right off, Mr. Speaker, it's certainly a great privilege to be back here in the House again, representing the riding of Pictou West. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, democracy is a wonderful institution. And I did have the opportunity in 1998, 1999 to be here in this House to represent the people of my riding in Pictou West at that time. And but I guess the voters decided in 1999 to give me a bit of a vacation or a bit of a hiatus from this position, and I respected that decision. That's democracy. That's the way it works. However, I guess with much encouragement from the family and friends and other members in my riding, I agreed to allow my name to stand and be on the ballot again in 2003. And again, I respect the decision of the electorate. That's democracy in action. But truly, Mr. Speaker, it is an honor to be back here in this Legislative Assembly for the second time, representing the people of Pictou West. And that's a responsibility that I take very seriously, and that I will certainly try to do my best to serve the constituents in my riding, and certainly also in the interest of all Nova Scotians. I want to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to congratulate you on your election to the office of Speaker. I believe you're the first Speaker to be elected twice in the history of this province, and you're to be commended for that. I certainly also want to congratulate the three deputy speakers that have been elected also to serve in this House, one from each party, and I know that all of you will conduct your business with fairness and always with wisdom. So I'm looking forward to working with you in the months and years to come. And certainly, I want to also say my congratulations to members of all three parties in this House that have been elected on the 5th of August, and it's certainly a great privilege for anybody to serve in the Nova Scotia House of Assembly and to serve in the best interests of their constituents. Sometimes we have our philosophical differences, and I'm sure that's going to continue, but I know deep down and at heart we have the best interest of our own province and our constituents that we represent at heart. So we may hopefully all cooperate and work towards a common goal for the betterment of Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, I would be remiss if I did not express my gratitude certainly to the many, many people who worked on my behalf in this past election campaign in the riding of Pictou West. And I have many family members and friends and constituency workers, numerous volunteers that worked very, very hard on my behalf, especially during the hot days of July as we were out canvassing door to door. And many of those people went beyond the measure of regular work and found extra time and effort to work on my behalf. I want to say a special thanks certainly to my wife Marilyn, to my mom and dad, and to all my family members who contributed greatly during that campaign. But also certainly to the many, many canvassers that were out there in all kinds of weather, knocking on the doors and doing the other work that was necessary in the headquarters. So from our youngest canvasser, who was a young gentleman by the name of Travis McNamara, age 9, right to our most senior canvasser, Alistair MacDonald, age 86, and all those in between, I want to express my sincere and heartfelt thanks to all of them. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take a few minutes now to tell the members of this House a little bit about the riding of Pictou West and some of the features, some of the pluses that are found on the north shore of this province. And Pictou West is located along the Northumberland shore, and there's a few things about the history and the geography and the people of my riding that I'd like to share with members here in the House today. I call it picturesque Pictou West, and it's probably a fitting name, is that it is a community of rolling hills and farming communities, fishing villages, an historic seaside town, and so I think picturesque is probably a good description to describe Pictou West. As I mentioned, Pictou West contains the historic town of Pictou and certainly quaint coastal communities such as Bayview, Brayshore, Caribou Island, Seafoam, Tony River, the lovely village of River John, and right along the shore as far as Marshville, right up to the Colchester County line. There's also fishing villages in Cape John and Tony River and at Caribou. Inland, we have a number of farming communities and woodlots and villages. Nice communities like Scottsburn, Durham, Salt Springs, Green Hill with a beautiful look-off there you can see for miles across the countryside. And there's a provincial park there, a day-use park, that is open if you want to picnic or just to take in the view and look over the countryside. Villages like Union Center, West River Station, and certainly anybody that's traveling along the Trans-Canada Highway through Pictou West, you'll come into villages like Mount Tom, Salt Springs, Salem, Mount William, and so on. And especially this time of year, it's very colorful. The autumn leaves are out at their very best, and it's just a great place to visit. One of the most unique communities, perhaps, in all of Pictou West is located on Pictou Island, and it's an area of this province that probably few people have had the opportunity to visit, but it's a beautiful 5-mile-long island, and it's located approximately 7 miles offshore in the Northumberland Strait. And there's about 25 hardy residents that live on Pictou Island year-round. Of course, in the summertime, that swells to maybe as high as a couple hundred, but there's no electrical power over there, and many of the residents use generators or solar power, but they're remarkably self-sufficient, and most of their food and supplies has to be brought in. In the wintertime especially, there's no boat or ferry service running to the island, and twice a week there's a mail delivery by private plane, but they're really quite isolated, and but just a beautiful place to visit, some warm sandy beaches in the summertime, and just some of the friendliest people on earth. The hospitality is wonderful, and I would encourage anybody that hasn't been to Pictou Island to take the ferry over. It leaves at 7 in the morning and comes back at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and so you could pack a picnic lunch and go over and visit some of the folks on Pictou Island. At the heart of Pictou West is the historic town of Pictou. And while we have a diversity of cultures in Pictou County that make up our history, I suppose starting with the Micmac and the Acadian, Irish and English and others, the strongest influence certainly is Scottish. And in fact, Pictou County is often called the heart of New Scotland. And in the town of Pictou, we have the Hector Heritage Quay located along the waterfront, and associated with it is the ship Hector. And probably many of you will know that the ship Hector was washed aground in this recent hurricane. In fact, you may have seen it in the news or in a picture in the paper. And fortunately, it wasn't damaged. There's some minor repairs that will be needed, and it's soon going to be brought up on dry dock, and it will be further assessed. But I did see it last Monday morning. It was washed ashore. It probably traveled 75 or 80 feet from its moorings, and during the height of the storm, it washed up against the rocks next to the local restaurant, and part of its mass was actually sticking into the roof of that building. But as the tide came back in that morning, it had been listing rather badly, and then it started to float back up, and at high tide they were able to get an excavator and haul it back over to where it should be moored, and so we're hoping there's no serious damage, but we'll soon know once it's brought up on dry dock. But the ship Hector is an exact replica of the ship that brought the first Scottish settlers to our county, and they came from Loch Broom in Scotland, and in the year 1773. And besides the ship Hector, which is a tourist attraction in itself, there is a museum there that depicts life for our Scottish settlers, both in the old country and after they arrived on our shores. You have to imagine that when they first come to Pictou County in 1773, the land was completely forested, and the Aboriginal people were here ahead of everybody, of course, but really there were very, very few people living on the North Shore or anywhere in our province at that time. But so naturally the people were a little bit afraid of what maybe lay ahead of them, and they had a piper come off the ship and escorted them to shore and waded in to the new land. And being the middle of September, it was too late then to plant any crops or put a garden in, and so it was a tough winter that first year. But all those things are depicted in this museum, and you can see the history of how they had lived in Scotland, and then how they lived here in the New World as they came to Nova Scotia. And both the Ship Hector and the exhibit there museum attract thousands of visitors annually, and it's certainly well worth visiting. And if you haven't been into that museum or seen the ship, I would highly recommend it if you're on vacation sometime or a day trip with your family. It would be well worth a visit. Also in the town of Pictou, we have the Hector National Exhibit Center, which brings in exhibits from across our country, traveling exhibits and art shows. And it's also there is the McCullough House Museum, named after Thomas McCullough, the founder of Pictou Academy. And but the most famous reason I guess people would visit the McCullough House Museum is for genealogical research. There's a lot of records there from especially that outlines the Scottish culture, the Scottish history, and it would be well worth a visit if you're interested in finding out your roots and finding out perhaps where you came from. Also in the town of Pictou, there's many historic buildings, many of them built out of stone. These stone buildings were built from ballast that came from ships that came across the Atlantic Ocean, and some also from native quarries from our county. And perhaps one of the most interesting stone buildings in the town of Pictou is the old Canadian National Railway headquarters. It's down on the waterfront, and until 1984 we had trains coming into the town of Pictou, and this was the headquarters for the railway. But at this time that building now houses the Northumberland Fisheries Museum. And I want to tell you a little bit, Mr. Speaker, about the Northumberland Fisheries Museum. And they've done a wonderful job there on collecting artifacts from all over the North Shore, from fishermen from past decades. And in fact, just this year they celebrated their 25th anniversary as a museum. And there's thousands of artifacts there that from decades past from fishermen that have been collected. And it's well worth a visit as well. They even got a fisherman's bunkhouse there with, at one time, fishermen didn't travel from their homes to go to their boats as they do now, but rather had a bunkhouse right on the wharf, and they would stay there overnight. So when 3 o'clock came, they were out quickly to their boats and to check their lobster traps or whatever type of fishing they were doing on that particular day. Also there at the museum, there's rare live lobsters. There's some boat building models, and many photos and news clippings from years past in the fishing industry that is well worth a visit. So I think it's truly a tribute to our fisher folk and a way of life along the Northumberland shore. Also, Mr. Speaker, the museum now has an outreach program. It's called Museum on Wheels. And they take the museum directly to schools, to school children, and also to communities throughout the Maritime provinces, into New Brunswick and PEI, as well as throughout Nova Scotia. And it's been highly successful. I know they had a community show one night in the Caribou area, and there were hundreds of folks come out to look at the old photos and exhibits and showing life in the fish factories and on the boats and so on, and brought back a lot of warm memories for a lot of people in those communities. But as I said, also they're now going into schools and throughout the Maritimes, and it's appreciated certainly by children and teachers in other communities. Another exciting aspect of that Northumberland Fisheries Museum is that recently the Board of Directors has embarked on a plan to build a new museum, and they're going to actually put it down on the waterfront close to the ship Hector and the Hector Heritage Quay. And so thousands of new visitors will experience the heritage and culture of the fishing industry as never before. And they have a business plan that's pretty well complete, and they set up a building committee and a fundraising committee, and they're hoping that various levels of government, organizations, businesses, and individuals will participate in this new project. I certainly hope, Mr. Speaker, that this government will participate in this new Fisheries Museum and be able to do what they can to see it come to fruition. Mr. Speaker, the communities in Pictou West, they're always alive with something going on 12 months of the year. There's usually musical ceilidhs, there's various festivals and events going on, and I just want to take a minute, Mr. Speaker, to share some of the things that's going on in Pictou West and along the North Shore. I guess one thing that I'll mention right off the top is that in the town of Pictou we have a wonderful facility called the DeCoste Entertainment Center, and it's been there now for 20 years, and over that period of time a great number of acts and theater groups and musical variety acts have come there, and promoting both our local musicians as well as those from away. Just for example, some of our local talent that we have showcased there include Dave Gunning, John Spider McDonald, a wonderful singer, Maurice Poirier, even a group like our Heather Bell Pipes and Drums Band that has been an ambassador for Pictou County and Nova Scotia as they've gone to Calgary and to Florida, and I believe next year they're planning a trip to Scotland. So there's been a lot of musical talent come out of Nova Scotia and out of Pictou County. Other highlights of our season in Pictou West include the Pictou Lobster Carnival. It's held every July, usually the second weekend of the month, and there's a chance for fishermen to come forward and after the busy lobster season and just to celebrate as a group. And that festival started in 1934, so it's the longest active lobster carnival in Canada. And there's contests like boat racing and the King Lobster contest, who caught the heaviest lobster during the season, lobster banding, and of course musical acts and carnival activities. And so it brings people in from all over that come back home, more or less, to celebrate with friends and family the end of the lobster season. Also in August, Pictou celebrates the Hector Festival, and musical talent from around the world has come in for that, and again it attracts many visitors to our town. The Alexander brothers from Scotland have been regular featured guests there at the Hector Festival. And of course, like many small communities, we have our exhibition. The Pictou North Colchester exhibition has been going for many years, and it's held on the grounds of the exhibition where the Hector Arena is also located. In addition, we have New Scotland Days held in September, when there's a reenactment going back to the early Scottish settlers, and that was a success again this year. I should also mention the village of River John. Very friendly people there that come together every July. They have their own festival. It's a week-long event, and many people come from far and near to visit River John, and it's just a lovely historical community with a lot of history. And I had the opportunity this summer to participate a few different times in their festival days. Throughout the year in Pictou West, there seems to be always something going on, and whether it's a festival or a church supper, a fire department dinner, Hunter's Breakfast in the fall of the year, Blueberry Social, there's Christmas teas, there's Christmas concerts. So, as I said, Mr. Speaker, there's always something going on 12 months of the year, and I would certainly invite members of this House and anyone to come out and learn why Pictou West is a very hospitable place and is fast becoming known as a tourist destination.
Order, please. Would the honourable member allow for an introduction?
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah, no problem.
I'd like to bring to the attention of the honourable members in the Speakers Gallery, of course, our renowned clerk, Mr. Rod MacArthur, but sitting with him is Mr. Jim Bickford. Jim's formerly of Ottawa, and he's been living in Annapolis Royal for the last 2 years, his adopted home. Jim is the owner of the Bread and Roses Bed and Breakfast in Annapolis Royal, and he was a former deputy chief of police in Ottawa, and he was also a former councillor in Ottawa. And certainly welcome Mr. Bickford to the House Assembly today, and I'd ask Mr. Bickford to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House. Welcome, Mr. Bickford. We hope you enjoy the proceedings. Thank you to the honourable member for Pictou West for the interruption. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I want to turn now, Mr. Speaker, to just mention the economy in Pictou West. I've told you about some of the festivals and the events and various activities that have been going on. And certainly the economy in Pictou West is quite diverse. In addition to the important resource industries of farming and fishing and lumbering, we certainly also have a variety of manufacturing in Pictou West, including our pulp mill at Abercrombie Point, the Kimberly-Clark mill, Michelin Tire in Granton, also some smaller industries like McKay Meters, located also in Abercrombie, Pictou Shipyards, which I'm pleased to report is up and running again, and approximately 100 men are hired or will be hired there very shortly on a new project they're working on. Groman Knives is located in the town of Pictou and is home of the world-famous Groman knife. The Pictou Advocate Printing and Publishing Company is headquartered in Pictou and serves and works throughout the Atlantic Canada. And there's also a number of smaller manufacturing, retail, and service businesses, as would be found in any community. In many ways, Mr. Speaker, there's a very strong entrepreneurial spirit on the North Shore, and many women and men have taken the initiative to start their own business. I know I come from a background of rural community and the farming industry, and also from a background of small business, and it's great to see a number of people that do take the initiative and start their own business. And I just want to tell you an example about one couple that has recently started their own business in the town of Pictou. Their names are Keith and Ann Matheson, who recently combined their talents to open Carver's Coffee House. Now, Carver's Coffee House is located on the waterfront in the town of Pictou. Keith is a master wood carver who he created the masthead on the ship Hector, and he now carves many unique creations from wood. And Anne, she's had experience before operating a shop and now looks after the marketing aspect for her husband's carving, but also operates the day-to-day coffee shop. And they're open year-round, so I invite people for a unique experience in a carving coffee house combination to visit their place of business. Other new businesses that have recently opened in Pictou West would include Abel's Canes near River John, Patacake Child Care Center in Pictou, and Safety First Driving School in the village of Durham. Small businesses continue to be the backbone of our economy, and I think it's very important, Mr. Speaker, that we encourage and continue to work with our entrepreneurs to provide the advice and the access to the necessary resources they need so they can continue to support our economy and help it to grow. Mr. Speaker, I would now like to turn to this past summer's election campaign and some of the issues that came up in my riding at that time, and I want to bring them to the attention of the House here at this time. I guess first of all was the election process itself and the problems that were created with the lack of enumeration. Now, I know the decision was made to go with the federal registry list, but you know that caused a number of problems. I know not just in my riding, but probably every member in this House can tell some stories about some difficulties that were created by the lack of enumeration. We had some people, for example, in my riding, they had to drive a great distance to get to the poll where they should vote, and often going past another voting booth or two other voting polls. Just didn't seem to make sense. They had to drive such a great distance to get to where they want to cast their ballot. Sometimes one member of a household was on the voters list and another was not. It just didn't seem to be any rhyme nor reason to it. I know some members that had lived in their community for more than 50 years, and yet they were not on the voters list. And some people felt that if they weren't important enough to be on the voters list, why should they vote? And I'm sure there were some people that didn't vote just simply because they felt offended that they were left off the list. Deceased people were on the list, and I'm sure you can think, other members can think of people in their ridings that were in the same situation. Hundreds of people on election day had to go through a swearing-in process because their name was not on the list. Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that democracy is well served when thousands of people in this province are left off the voters list. And if voter participation can be improved by returning to full enumeration, then let's do it. Mr. Speaker, I'd now like to turn to some of the issues that I heard on the election trail in Pictou West, and certainly one of the most common that came up over and over was the poor condition of our secondary roads. The roads that we live on, the roads that we drive on every day. And many of these roads have been neglected for years, even decades. And there are numerous stories of drivers hitting a pothole or breaking the front end part on their car, the tie rod ends, or the wheel bearing, or getting a flat tire just from hitting a dangerous section of a secondary roads. And rural residents are, in particular, they're hit doubly hard, not only by high gasoline prices that they have to expend in order to get to work or wherever, a doctor's appointment, wherever, but they're also being hit with expensive repairs every time they have to go to the garage. Government neglect of our secondary roads is costing local drivers, and it's discouraging investment in our rural economy, including tourism development. And Mr. Speaker, I was reading through this throne speech, I think it was on page 13, and in there's mention of promised investments in roads. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you that I hope that some of that promised investment in roads will be spent on some of the secondary roads in Pictou West, because they are in dire need of improvement. And I just want to run through some of the secondary roads that could use this promised investment. Roads such as the White Hill Road in near Union Center, back of Westville. Terrible secondary road. It's potholed, there's broken asphalt, there's many things wrong with that road. The Millbrook Road, the number 4 highway at Mount Tom, that's the old road that used to be the main route to Truro from Pictou County, and occasionally it's still used as a main route when the highway is blocked or there's an accident, or on occasion the traffic has been diverted onto the old number 4 through Salt Springs and Mount Tom. And the upper Mount Tom section in particular is in great need of repair. It really hasn't been touched probably since 1968, when the Trans-Canada Highway was put through our county. Some others that absolutely need some of this promised investments in roads would include the Scotch Hill Road, the road between Durham and Scottsburn, up over the Durham Hills, the 256 highway from Scottsburn towards West Branch, and certainly the road between the West Branch and River John. Last year, that road was partially paved from the village of River John out as far as the McKay Road, but it needs to be finished. It's nice and smooth, but it's not finished, and we need more improvement in that secondary road. Other roads that need improvement would be the Tony River area of the Sunrise Trail. From Tony River to River John. It's an important route. It's traveled by many local folks and tourists, and no question it's in need of repair. The Alma Road, the Granton Road, the Abercrombie Road, Highway 376 through Linesbrook and Durham, and many others too numerous to mention. We must start investing in our secondary roads. We must do that investment now. And the other thing that we need is a priority system so that it's based on fairness and an objective criteria that is transparent so people will know when their road is going to be repaired or upgraded. Mr. Speaker, another aspects of secondary roads that I want to mention are what's known as J-class roads. And these are roads that are owned by municipalities, but quite often serviced or looked after by the province for a yearly fee. And I want to speak in particular of one of these J-class roads. It's known as the Pumping Station Road. It's near the town of Westville. In fact, for many years, the town of Westville had used that road, or owned it actually, through an agreement with the landowner. They had a long-term lease on the land, and they serviced it because their drinking water came from the Middle River. But in the late 90s, they abandoned that road because they found another source of water, and there's approximately 8 homeowners on the street. And I feel it's important that something is done to help these homeowners. It seems that nobody's taken responsibility for it. Neither the municipality, nor the province, nor the town of Westville. It's sort of left in a limbo in no man's land. And now that there's another water source for the town, somebody has to take ownership of that road and provide maintenance and repair that's needed to look after the homeowners that live along the Pumping Station Road. So I hope, Mr. Speaker, that perhaps the minister is listening here this afternoon, and the Minister of Transportation would find a workable solution there for the residents of Pumping Station Road. Finally, concerning roads, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to mention that the 100 series highways through Pictou County and throughout our province be maintained, and we work towards doubling them as quickly as possible. It's a safety issue, really, is what it is. And I think we have to put more emphasis on negotiating with the federal level of government to provide more dollars so that our 100 series roads can be looked after. It's cost sharing, and the more we're able to obtain from the federal, the more that we have to put in as a province, and I think it's important that be done. And finally, on transportation, I just want to mention the important link that we have in Pictou County between our province and Prince Edward Island, and that would be the Northumberland Ferries link across the Northumberland Strait. And that's an important link that helps our economy in Nova Scotia and in eastern PEI, and I would urge this government to work with the Federal Department of Public Works to maintain that vital service. It really is important to the economy of Nova Scotia and the PEI. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to move on now and talk about some of the other issues that were of concern during this past election campaign in Pictou West. And I guess after roads, the number one issue I would have heard about would have been car insurance, and but also other types of insurance such as property and liability and small business insurance. But first of all, car insurance. And I'm continuing to hear from folks that have some real difficulty paying the high premiums. In fact, just today I had a resident call me that their son is 19 years old, and he bought a car so he could attend the community college in Stellarton. And but then he got his insurance bill. It was $2,500, and that's on the lower side of some of the premium cost I've heard. And he just can't afford it. So he had to give up his car, and he had to move into a boarding home in the town of Stellarton and to continue his education. But over and over during the campaign, I heard from residents, and I'm sure many in this House also have, the high cost is just hurting young people in particular. They can't afford to go to their place of employment or their place of higher learning, and male young drivers under 25 are being hit the hardest. Rates have gone up an average of more than 65% in the last year. And some people tell me their rates have doubled or even tripled. One young driver told me he bought a car. It cost him $3,000, and he worked at slightly more than minimum wage. I think it was $7.15 an hour he was getting. But then he shopped around for insurance, and the best quote he could get was $6,000. So there was no way he could afford that. And so again, he sold his car back to where he'd bought it from, and he's just not able to work. And I think the high insurance rates are hurting our economy. They're preventing young people in particular from getting to their place of employment. Very high rates are, like I said, hurting our economy. It's not only the huge amount of dollars that are leaving our province as premiums to be invested elsewhere, but it's in preventing young people in particular, from getting meaningful employment and a means to get there. In the end, some are choosing to drive without insurance, and I don't think that's wise or to be commended, but people have no dollars to put towards insurance. They're making that choice. But no government should allow that to happen. What the New Brunswick government has offered the drivers there has not worked. And the tinkering as outlined by this government, I don't believe either is going to work. And what we believe in the New Democratic Party is that a driver-owned system or a public car insurance system, it's worked successfully for more than 30 years in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, and I think it's the only real solution that's going to work for Nova Scotia drivers. So let's take the best that's available from those provinces and bring the lowest and fairest rates here to Nova Scotia drivers. Mr. Speaker, I looked through the throne speech, and there's some things in there that were good and some things that were not so good. And but one thing that I was saddened to see that wasn't there was any mention of relief for our seniors who are entering long-term nursing homes. This is an issue that was important to many within my riding over the last number of months, and it continues to be. Many seniors in this province are continuing to pay the highest nursing home fees anywhere in this country. Some are between $5,000 and $6,000 a month. And seniors are being asked to give up their lifetime of assets. Seniors who worked hard all their lives, and they've paid their fair share of taxes. And now when they most need it, their Medicare is being taken from them. And they have to pay for it themselves. I think that is morally wrong, and it's not that way in the most of this country. Most other provinces only require that the residents pay their room and board. And that's all we're asking here that would be fair in Nova Scotia. Medicare in the other provinces is covered the same as it would be if you or I were to end up in a hospital. And in Quebec, in Ontario, and the 4 western provinces, that's the way it is. So it's time now, Mr. Speaker, for this government to start treating our seniors fair and to end the bankruptcy of our seniors as they enter into nursing homes. The NDP will hold this government accountable until they do the right thing by our seniors. Mr. Speaker, in the riding of Pictou West, we have an institution in the town of Pictou. It's called the Sutherland Harris Memorial Hospital. And it was built there with local capital in the 1960s when community fundraising drives, and it was a good full-service hospital. For many years we had babies born there and operations performed, and but all that has changed over the past number of years, probably the last 10 years or so, with downsizing and rollbacks and cutbacks. We've lost the acute care services. We've lost emergency services. Like I said, there's no operations performed or babies born. There are a few things still left there. I'm pleased to report it does have a blood collection service 3 mornings a week. It has a dialysis unit, and there's certainly a good rehab facility there that people can go and get rehabilitation after an injury or an accident. And also the veterans unit is there with 20 beds that serve veterans from all over this province. And in addition, just recently, there's a doctor's clinic there during evening hours that allow people to go and visit their doctor and try to get some assistance. But I guess the service that most people would really like to see restored there to the Southern Harris Memorial Hospital would be X-ray services. And that would be convenient for a lot of people. They would not have to travel up town to the Aberdeen Hospital. And quite often there's a long wait, as long as a month, to get a routine X-ray. And it would certainly take some of the stress off the Aberdeen Hospital in New Glasgow. So I hope that the Department of Health, in conjunction perhaps with our local DHA and our community health boards, can work to restore X-ray services to our local hospital in Pictou. And speaking of district health authorities, I think it's important to point out that they absolutely need solid, stable funding, and so that they can adequately plan their budgets. We're more than halfway into the budget year, and they're still not sure the amount of dollars that they have to work with. Looking through the throne speech, Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to see a couple items here that perhaps were of benefit to Nova Scotians, and I'm pleased to see in there. One was the idea of introducing a low-income assistance program for diabetics. Many Nova Scotians are afflicted with this disease, and many find it increasingly difficult to pay for their insulin and their strips and their needles. And I hope that that particular initiative can be implemented as quickly as possible. I know I do have a nephew that's a juvenile diabetic, and since the age of 11, he has suffered from that disease. I've talked to another young lady in my riding that is working at the present time, but very much every day has to take insulin for her disease. And she's sort of stuck in her job because through that employment she has medical benefits, so she's a bit afraid to leave that job because then she'd would have to pay for the full cost of her diabetic supplies. So I hope that initiative, Mr. Speaker, will be acted on as quickly as possible. Another thing in the throne speech that I was pleased to see was a further commitment from this government designating Egg Mountain and Gully Lake as wilderness protection areas. Pictou County has no such designated wilderness protection areas at this time. And although I know that with the resolution I introduced last week, it didn't receive unanimous support, but nonetheless it's encouraging to see it in the throne speech that those two areas of our province would be worked towards designation as wilderness protection areas. Gully Lake is probably the one that's closest to my heart, and it contains 11,000 acres of crown land. It sort of straddles my riding of Pictou West and the neighboring riding of Colchester North. And it's a pristine, unspoiled crown land. It would not be that difficult to designate that land as wilderness protection area. I think, Mr. Speaker, we owe it to future generations to make sure that we conserve that land, not only for the plants and the animals and the birds and insects and other forms of life found there, but for the people. You know, there's something very special about wilderness areas, and maybe my feelings are best summed up in the writings of famous outdoorsman. His name was S. Stanley Hawbaker, and he had a saying that, "Go ye to the wild woods, its waters and hills, for it is good to live thus." And I think that sums up my feelings on the importance of protecting our wilderness protection areas. Protection of our environment certainly is very important, and locally in Pictou County, the cleanup of Pictou Harbor is absolutely necessary. That's a joint provincial, municipal, perhaps federal initiative that needs to be looked after. And I know the town of Pictou and the municipality of Pictou County are working on obtaining funding to do just that and have a safer and cleaner harbor. And also, I think we have to work on finding methods to stop the air pollution that is occurring in various areas of this province, and certainly in Pictou County. Two of the worst identified polluters of the air were from our area of the province. Kimberly Clark, and was, I think, number 5 on the list, and the power generating plant at Trenton was number 2. So those are areas that hopefully our Department of Environment and this government will work on initiatives to clean up the air pollution. I guess, Mr. Speaker, one other thing I'd like to mention that I was disappointed that I didn't see in the throne speech. I was disappointed there was no plan to curb the high tuition costs that students are facing. Both university and secondary college tuitions have risen dramatically over the past number of years, and it's getting harder and tougher for young people or people of any age to be able to afford to go to university or secondary school, and I think something has to be done to curb those very high tuition rates that students are facing. And I was also disappointed, Mr. Speaker, that there was no mention in the throne speech about HST relief for basic family essentials, things like heating fuel, electricity, or children's medications. You know, people deserve a break. People that live hand to mouth or low-income people, for example, people on minimum wage deserve a break. Young people starting out deserve a break. Anybody that's disabled, disadvantaged, deserve a break. People living below the poverty line, seniors on low fixed income deserve a break. Single moms, struggling small business people deserve a break. And certainly the unemployed and the working poor deserve a break. So, Mr. Speaker, I believe my time is winding down, and I want to perhaps close where I began. I said at the beginning that it certainly was a privilege for me to once again serve the people of Pictou West, and I sincerely mean that, and it's certainly true. But I want to go back beyond that a little bit to where really it all began for me. And as I mentioned earlier, I was born and raised on the family farm, and that was in Durham in Pictou County. And I guess, Mr. Speaker, there with a large family, I learned many of life's lessons. But today, Mr. Speaker, as we all know, the family farms are disappearing. There's less and less of them. And I think it's important, though, that we as collectively